Every day, I talk with clients who are feeling stuck at the crossroads between their past and future and feeling really uncertain about where they want to go and how they want to get there. Maybe you're transitioning between jobs or exiting a business or career, or maybe you're ending a long-term relationship, or like me, you're becoming an empty nester and you're wondering how to fill the sudden gap in your life. No matter what kind of change you're facing, navigating these times of change can be really tough. You might be experiencing pain and grief, or maybe relief that comes with an ending. Or maybe you're in the messy middle of confusion and really unsure about what's next, which can also be coupled with excitement. Or maybe you're emerging into a new beginning, feeling all the feels that come with starting something new. Today's guest is an expert on midlife transitions, and she's going to share an approach that really helps you to gain the insight and clarity you need to embrace the unknown and step courageously into your new reality. I'm Sue West, and this is Flourish After 50. My guest today is Kari Cardinale. She's the Chief Content Officer and a partner at the Modern Elders Academy, or MEA, the world's first midlife wisdom school. She's a leader in the fields of longevity, online community building, and transformational learning. She's worked with hundreds of thought leaders worldwide and played a pioneering role in developing MEA's original content and digital campus, which serves thousands of learners annually, including me. Kari served as a regular contributor to the Huffington Post and contributed to the Amazon #1 bestseller, Embracing Your Authentic Self. And this is my favourite part of Kari's bio. She's curious about everything and committed to lifelong learning. Welcome, Kari.
Oh, thank you so much, Sue. It's a pleasure to be here today. And hello, everybody.
Now, Kari, we're going to be talking today a bit about the MEA and your role there and the wonderful frameworks and tools that you've evolved over time and how they can help women. I've absolutely been the beneficiary of the work that you've been doing. I'm an alumni of the MEA, having done the Navigating Transitions course back in, I think, 2021. And I did that online during COVID times and at a time when my own life was going through significant change. And I've benefited from all of that wisdom. And it's also really helped me shape how I think about it, work with women in terms of understanding transitions and the really strong internal process that we go through as we navigate change. Since then, I've been an active member of the MEA alumni in Australia and the Asia Pacific region, and also part of a network of Australian coaches has emerged from following the course. So it's been a fantastic opportunity for me personally and professionally. But for people in Australia who might not be familiar with MEA, what is it and how did you come to be working there?
Such a great question. You know, it's a funny word, really, the Modern Elder Academy. And so many people had such a hard time with the word. We often call it MEA because it's easier to say. And it's also easier to kind of slide through to what it is. So what is it? The world's first midlife wisdom school. It was a concept that was developed by a gentleman named Chip Conley. He is a US-based entrepreneur and had his first kind of round as an entrepreneur running a series of boutique hotels called Joie de Vivre. So he really innovated in creating these very eccentric, personality, community-driven small hotels. And he started that business when he was 25, and then he sold the company at age 50, very much at the beginning of a midlife journey, had already been through the last half of his 40s struggling to some degree with many things. And he was wondering what he wanted to do next at 50 and was approached by some colleagues asking if he'd be willing to mentor two young men who were also 25, starting their first business. And it was a small company called Airbnb. And the young bucks did not know much about hospitality. Chip actually didn't know that much about technology, but they were a match made in heaven. And Chip served as head of global hospitality at Airbnb for 7 years. And it was actually Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, who called Chip the modern elder. And
Mm.
so you may guess that he did not appreciate that that term at the time, and actually felt insulted by it. And then they came back and said that it truly was a compliment, that in their minds, a modern elder is someone who is as curious as they are wise. And it struck a chord for him because he realized at 50, he was starting an entirely new career. And he was both a mentor in working with them and sharing the wisdom he learned as a business owner, but he was also an intern. He was learning all about online businesses and things he didn't know anything about, and working with people half his age. And so he wrote a book called Wisdom at Work. And it was during that time he was realizing that midlife has become very interesting point in life, that we're living so much longer than we had even 100 years ago. We've gained 30 years of life. And most of us who are hitting midlife don't have a great roadmap for what's ahead of us. That if we look into our previous generations, the way they lived their lives at our age is very different than we're living it now. So he was inspired to bring back up his hospitality roots and open a small campus for a small wisdom school in Mexico. And I happened to meet Chip in 2017. I was working in the aging and longevity industry, met him at a conference. I didn't actually know who he was, but I was so inspired by his mission. And I felt like he really was speaking to me and to so many others I felt would benefit from this. So I came down to experience the program when it was still in what he called the beta period, and loved it so much and was able to start working with Chip right away. And 7 years later, the rest is history, almost 8 now.
It's a fantastic story, and I've heard Chip on a number of TED Talks as well, and we can include some of those links in the show notes that where he talks about his origin story and the beginning of the MEA, which is fantastic. Let's talk a little bit more about what a modern elder is. In the Australian context, we use the term elder for a First Nations person who's respected for and recognised by their community as a custodian of cultural knowledge and tradition and law. So eldership isn't necessarily in our First Nations community defined by age. So it's not a term, we use the word elderly for much, much older people, although some people like my kids use the term elderly for people like me. But I know that the MEA think about modern elder in a much broader sense. And you've said a couple of things already. What else can you tell us about modern elders?
Really, what we're trying to do is to redefine what midlife means. That's one of the primary missions of MEA, is to take a look at midlife as a word that really has gotten a bit of a bad brand. That we think of that word midlife and we assume it's tied to a terrible moment in time, a midlife crisis, when everything is going badly. And yet, that's actually not the case at all. That social scientists, because we are living longer, are really categorizing midlife as this very long stage that can go anywhere from 35 to 75, during which time we may be going through many different transitions of, maybe you're a young entrepreneur and you sold your business at 36 and you already have kids and you're experiencing kind of midlife situations. Or maybe you had kids later in life and had the same job and picked your head up close to 70. So we're really passionate about examining the mindset that we may have around turning these different ages within this midlife bracket, and helping others to take a look at their mindset. That, are we limiting our future because we're imagining that turning a certain age means that we have fewer opportunities or possibilities? And how do we help folks to find new community at this stage of life when they may be transitioning away from raising their kids or their work and so on? So we found it's a really interesting time of life. And the first half of life, we have a lot of things that everyone does together. So we all went to high school together, went to university together, sort of young adulthood, becoming parents, raising young children. These are all known milestones. Then once midlife comes along, there aren't really any rituals or schools or milestones that we can really identify with. And so many folks sort of feel a little adrift during these years or are very much alone. And so wonderful coaches like you, Sue, are cropping up to help us think through this stage and maybe move through it a little more consciously or maybe a little more elegantly than by just reacting to it or the way society would tell us to react to it.
I really love that idea of consciously curating our lives and our futures, and that's kind of reauthoring and self-authoring process that we go through at this life stage. Can you say a little bit more about transitions? I know the MEA talk about 6 pillars. What are they?
Yeah, it's a process as we began opening the midlife wisdom school and people were coming through. We spent a lot of time talking about our mindset and about ageism and aging. And what became very evident after a period of time is that what we were really talking about were different life transitions. The people were coming and struggling. They had just retired or they were moving or they had parents moving on into, facilities. They had kids moving out. Relationships were changing. Those are all transitions. And so we began focusing on this topic in great detail and building on the work of giants like William Bridges, and we'll speak more about the stages of transition, and Bruce Feiler, who helped research kind of our modern understanding of transitions. And then as we spent some time exploring this with our folks who've been coming through our doors, we realized that there are these areas, these pillars of life that transitions tend to appear. So we may have psychological transitions as we're getting older. We may feel a bit more anxious or a bit more risk averse or unwilling to try new things as we get older. We may have transitions around our sense of purpose and meaning, that perhaps the things we used to do really aren't fulfilling us in the same way. We certainly have personal transitions with changing relationships, empty nesting, caregiving, and so on. We may have physical transitions, certainly. Women, menopause is a massive physical transition that we may or may not be fully aware of how it's impacting us. We may have relationships that have passed away, those that we love who've passed on. We may have others that we just aren't talking to or connected with anymore, some sort of parting of ways. And of course, professionally, we may have transitions where some folks, women in particular, may be coming out of a long period of time of raising kids and ready to start up something new, a new career. Some are winding down careers. Some are trying to build a hobby project. So those transitions are occurring. So what's interesting is we may be feeling a sense of general stuckness or a sense of anxiety. We may not know why. And for us, being able to break these transitions down that we're experiencing into these pillars helps give us a little space from the intensity of them to help us realize, no wonder we may be feeling this way because there's a lot going on. And the good news is that there are strategies to approach these transitions a bit more consciously.
Mm. Well, I'd love to get into that in a moment. I just want to comment on what you just said, which is about the 6 pillars, because what I've found in using that framework in my own coaching is that often someone will come to me with one set of changes that they're experiencing, and when we talk about the 6 pillars, they realize that they're experiencing change across multiple areas of their life, and that's when they have this aha moment of, oh, okay, so this is, a life quake or a really significant period of in my life that needs some special space and time and attention to help me navigate. So it's often that clustering of those changes can be the really big thing that happens at this stage of life.
Absolutely. Bruce Feiler's a friend of mine and an amazing thinker, and he wrote a book called Life is in the Transitions. And he calls some of these disruptors. So something may come along in our life that's a disruptor to it. And when we have several of these transitions happening at once, he calls it a life quake. It kind of feels like an earthquake in your life, but it's a life quake. And we don't have that state all the time, but we do have those times in our life when we may be experiencing that combination of challenges simultaneously, and that's often when we need support the most.
Yeah, I've certainly been through a couple of those myself, Carrie, over time, and when I came across that term life quake, it resonated very strongly with the significant disruption that I'd been through. So you mentioned there are things that you've learnt help. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Researching transition work and again working with William Bridges' work, who wrote a lot about managing change and transition. I loved how he broke the stages of transition into three stages, and I found that while they may not always go exactly in this order, these stages are very distinct. So often transitions may begin with an ending, which seems counterintuitive. But a transition is often kicking off when something is ended. So the marriage has ended. You're just retired from your job. You moved away from the family home into a smaller house. Your children have moved out of the house. So there's this ending of life as you have known it, which kicks off this transition. Because a transition is psychological. A transition is something that's happening to us on the inside, even though changes are the things that are happening to us on the outside. So your identity is changing by no longer being married to someone, or no longer living in this home, or no longer being your child's mother or father as your primary identity. So those endings have a lot of emotions that go with it. There's often grief or shock or anger or sadness or excitement. It can be many things. Some of us are better at endings than others. Some of us really struggle with endings and have those long goodbyes. Others just love to get through them as quickly as possible. And then that second stage of transition begins, which we call the messy middle. The messy middle is that unknown period of time when we again have to let go of one identity and we haven't yet created a new one yet. We have to let go of a schedule that we're used to and we don't have a new one yet. So many emotions that we may have attached to a certain time of life that we have to absorb and metabolize and shift to move into another. So it feels a bit like you're swinging on a trapeze and you've let go of one bar and haven't grabbed the other yet. You're sort of wallowing in a soupy space or wandering in a dark forest, whatever your metaphor. It is a confusing time. It's normal to feel a little discombobulated during this time. It can feel sometimes like you're stuck. You don't know how long this stage is going to last. It's often is the longest stage of transitions, but it also can be a really creative time. It can also be the magical middle for exploring new things and really learning things about yourself that you hadn't discovered before. And then comes the new beginning. And new beginnings are we're doing something new. Like yes, I'm an empty nester, but now I'm also an artist. I've started painting and I'm an artist. I've sold my stuff at the local farmer's market. Amazing. These new opportunities come, or I've started a new business, or I have moved into a new relationship. And those new beginnings also can bring a certain amount of trepidation, excitement, worry, and so on. So, what I found is very helpful for women is that very rarely, if ever, are we experiencing one transition at a time. There are often many that are happening at once. So, to be able to write down on a piece of paper the different transitions that you are resonating that are happening in your life, and then just think about is this an ending? Am I at the beginning stages? Am I in the messy middle? Am I in a new beginning? That process is very insightful and it allows a little opportunity to have some space from the intensity of each one, allows you to have a bigger eagle's eye view of what's happening with your life at that moment, a snapshot, and perhaps to usher in a little self compassion that no wonder you may be experiencing a lot of emotions or feeling a little stuck or just wanting to go watch Netflix at night and hide away from the world because there's so many things. And sometimes just seeing this gives you the courage to maybe take a few steps in a particular direction or resolve an issue or make a decision to move something forward.
Yes, I really like that. And I think with the women I see in my coaching, many of them come in And when we talk about the stages of transition, they are really strongly identify with the messy middle and then needing support to help navigate that stage of change. And I think having that framework of the 3 stages really helps normalize the experience for women as well, to say, yes, there's a lot of change going on. That internal transition is, something that happens for women over 50, and it's understanding where you are in the transition phase can be really, really normalizing. I'm just like everybody else. I've got my own unique story, and I'll come at it in my own unique way, but there's lots of other people out there just like me, and I think that's really helpful. So, for someone in the messy middle, what have you found has helped?
Well, the messy middle in particular, I think is an interesting time that we're kind of wading through this space. And I found that often in that messy middle time, being creative is a really helpful thing to do, to give yourself permission to take a little time and do something, that's sort of interesting to you. I call them glimmers that I find moving through transitions more elegantly is to look for a glimmer in your life, Sue. And so it could be, you know, I was watching a program the other day and this woman was playing the piano. And I realized how much I haven't played the piano for years and it's been collecting dust and all it has is family photos, but maybe I'll dust it off. That's a glimmer. And maybe indeed you don't do anything about it for a week or two. And then suddenly someone else starts speaking about starting a piano. And you thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was just thinking about this. And you still don't do anything about it. And then you're having coffee and someone says, oh, did you know so and so is starting to teach piano lessons? They say, oh my gosh, I keep hearing this everywhere I go. This must be a sign. Me, that is a great example of a glimmer. It means it's time for you to go open up that piano and get your fingers on the keys. Does that mean you're going to become a professional musician? No. It just is a little nudge from the universe, nudging you into something creative, something sort of lyrical. And that process is really a wonderful way to move out of a messy middle, to just follow something that is sort of interesting and glittery to you without it having to be attached to making money from it or any particular outcome. Maybe you are interested in uh, art, gardening, music, exercise, trying Pilates. I know many women in midlife who all of a sudden start playing pickleball. Whatever it is that
It's
might be fun and interesting. I think of it as a glimmer. Think of it as sort of this little fairy light that can pull you out of sometimes the doldrums of the messy middle. The kids are gone. I'm not sure what I'm doing. I can't find my joy anymore. That process to me is an accelerator to move through a messy middle.
I love that, and it's really offsets nicely some of the deeper, harder feelings, doesn't it, when you can tap into that creativity. And, I was listening to an interview with, Chip and Martha Beck recently, and where she gave, I think it was in the one with Chip, where she gave a really lovely example of, imagining doing something that was, uh I think the example was having a piece of orange and imagining taking a bite and sucking the juice out and feeling imagining the flavors, and this really beautiful sort of experience that you can conjure up in your imagination, even to shift you out of a space of feeling low or challenged into a much more present, enjoyable, luxurious state. So there are all these lots of different things that we can try in the moment, but also in terms of continuing to build out our lives into the examples that you gave of taking up a creative pursuit. It introduces you to new people. It activates part of your brain that's about learning. It might not be for you, but it helps build the experience of yourself as a competent person who takes action. So we get new ideas about who we are. as we try out new things.
So true. Martha Beck is one of our faculty at MEA. She has a new book out called Beyond Anxiety. She's a Harvard researcher and life coach. And she's discovered for herself and now with many others that when we're in an act of being creative, it's actually quite difficult to be anxious. So it doesn't matter what you do. You go to a painting class, you take up your knitting, whatever it is, that process of being creative is incredibly helpful to shift us out of a state of mind that's not productive, anxiety provoking, and help keeping us stuck rather than moving forward.
And I've also heard you talk about this period as the opportunity to experience this as a liminal space. Right. And rather than thinking about midlife in the form of midlife crisis, the idea of chrysalis, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, one of the best metaphors for transitions, of course, I find metaphors fascinating, that metaphors help us to identify with something quite quickly. So there's an animal in nature that really identifies these three stages of transitions beautifully, and it's a caterpillar who moves into that cocoon or chrysalis, moves into the butterfly. And so think about your life as a woman pre-50, sort of being the caterpillar. It's a very focused time of life where there's many specific goals we're focusing on: getting the job, getting some financial security, maybe getting married, maybe having kids, raising the kids. All of those jobs are very focused. And then suddenly, for some point, this caterpillar starts spinning itself into a cocoon, a chrysalis, and it turns into goo. It literally breaks down its cellular structure into a liquid form. That is what we call a liminal state. Many of you listening to this are probably smiling and nodding your head, going, "Oh my God, that is me right now. I'm that. I am goo in a big cocoon of my life right now. I have no idea if I'm coming or going or what is happening." And so this chrysalis, messy middle liminal space is really what midlife is. And we've been focusing on this idea of the midlife chrysalis instead of a midlife crisis. Notice how different it feels. Feels sort of full of possibility because, of course, we know what is happening in this chrysalis is that something beautiful is coming, that this creature is transforming. True transformation is happening. And eventually, this chrysalis starts to peel away until it's just a translucent little tiny cover. And suddenly, these wings start to dry in the wind. And you have an entirely new creature, a butterfly that no longer is munching on leaves, but is flying around pollinating flowers. And what a wonderful idea for us as women in midlife to think about that.
Yeah.
What if our life could be like that? That we had our first half of life, we did all the things the best we could. We go into this challenging period with lots of changes, but we use it as a time to really reflect on who we are now and what wisdom we have gained, and to create this new image of what the next half of our life could be. So, Sue, what I found interesting is this whole idea of this midlife chrysalis. Chip actually started his own podcast under this topic, midlife chrysalis. You can hear Chip speak with Martha Beck and many others. You can look it up on any place you might get podcasts. But what I found is that what we were doing here at MEA, we have a digital campus. And so we created all of these programs to be available online. Sue, that's how I met you in 2021, that we built this 6-week in-depth navigating transitions online course. I have now brought thousands of students through this program, including an enormous group from Australia and Asia. Some of my absolute favorite alumni have come from Australia. We run live events in our time zones that work accordingly. So your morning and our evening before. And it's through those online courses over the many years, I learned so much from everyone's stories. And I was astonished to see, as we move through COVID and beyond, how extraordinarily similar our lives are as human beings. That I have folks showing up from 50 countries. Some ran businesses, some were stay at home parents, some were artists, all walks of life. And somehow, without knowing anything about each other's stories, we all were sharing a common story through conversations, through learning about transition, learning about how we approach them as such a universal human experience. People kept saying, "My gosh, I thought I was the only one feeling this way." And I realized I'm not alone. And so it was through this work, kind of field work, really. We also teach this program at our campus in Baja, Mexico, as well as at our campus in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So, two locations, one in Mexico, one in the US, but our digital campus is fully global. And we started creating new language. We were imagining that this is much bigger than we thought. This is really building transitional intelligence, became the body of work that we started creating. That transitional intelligence is something we really need in midlife. We can't just be stumbling through these stages. We need to build what we call TQ, that Daniel Goleman was famous for creating emotional intelligence, EQ. I love his work. It was so brilliant to help us understand how to think about our emotions, others' emotions, and broaden our capacity to be more emotionally present and aware. Well, imagine if we can apply the same concept to build our own TQ, our own transitional intelligence, so we can be more aware of how we're moving through transitions, how to find a easier path. And so I have a great example for you, Sue, of one of our students who came through an online course several years ago. Her name's Anna. It's not her real name, but that's the name I'm calling her. And Anna was the quintessential life quake midlife woman. She was in her mid 50s and she came to us really struggling that her husband had asked for a divorce quite suddenly. She didn't see it coming. He'd been having an affair. Meanwhile, they had moved to a new city in America that she was unfamiliar with. And her youngest daughter had left the year before to go to college. So she was an empty nester in a new town about to get a divorce. Now, meanwhile, she originally was from India and her aging parents were needing a lot of help from her at that time. So she was traveling from the US to India, back and forth, managing some caregiving duties. And so she shows up with all of these things happening at once. And what we did was we applied transitional intelligence to her journey. And she was able to recognize what of all those transitions was an ending. Well, the marriage was an ending, right? Okay, got it. All right, what is in a messy middle right now? Well, she was a bit in a messy middle with the empty nesting, but she didn't feel like that was the bigger challenge. She already had some practice with her older kids. This was her younger one. Yes, she was feeling that grief, but really the biggest messy middle for her was caregiving her aging parents. That was quite stressful for her. And what was in a new beginning was, well, living in a new town, starting to create a new network. Because she now would be single again, she wanted to start her own consulting business. So she was able to put all this down on a piece of paper and look at all the emotions that were happening for her. And as a result, she started making decisions. She said, all right, the marriage is over. I'm not going to fight this. I'm just going to get an attorney and let's be as civil as we can and let's move through this. The middle part, the caregiving, she realized that she had some time now, that she could actually spend more time in India with her parents and not feel so rushed that heading over there and managing the details and hopping on a plane home. So she started booking longer stretches of time to be there to really enjoy the time with them. And the new beginnings, she decided to postpone starting her business for a year so that she could just focus on making some new friends, getting settled in the area. She joined a yoga class. And after doing that exercise, she felt so much clearer. She was so relieved that she now had sort of a compass and some tools, and she had a path ahead of her.
And I can hear in there clarity, but I can also hear confidence. and decision making about herself and her future. And I assume that for most of us, we've experienced various transitions across our lifetime and developed some core skills for ourselves or even some superpowers that it can be helpful to be reminded of and bring those to the fore in our lives in these significant times of change. Did you hear anything about that in that particular case, or do you hear in your work at MEA about the sort of superpowers that people bring from across their life experience?
Absolutely. We have a term for it. We call it your signature TQ.
Mhm.
So, as you kind of dive into understanding transitional intelligence, and certainly with our TQ certified coaches, that I was so fortunate to be able to take this body of work and partner with coaching.com and to very intensive ICF certified course that Sue is a graduate of, to certify coaches who really understand transitional intelligence. They understand TQ. They have tools to help clients who are moving through these different stages of transition to really learn this about yourself, to understand what is your strategy in moving through transitions. And then understanding your own signature TQ will help you, because transitions are not going to stop coming for you. They will continue to come. And so just knowing how we manage these different stages of transitions is part of your signature TQ, can become part of your superpower in knowing how you natively and consistently have managed previous transitions, to think about maybe an ending that you move through really well. Maybe you did have actually a pretty good divorce and you're really proud of that. That could be an example. And sort of how you feel, how you felt about that transition is a part of a superpower. And in Messy Middle, I often ask people to think about, what are the things you love to do, when you are, feeling a little out of sorts. Now, we may have our less than healthy things that we do. Like some of us may bake and eat an entire dozen cookies or have that extra glass of wine or watch the entire Netflix series. We may have our least favorite things that we do, but we also may have some, kind of things that really help us feel better. When we have some time and we're kind of sorting things out, some of us may find that going out for a hike in nature is our thing. Or for others, it might even be cleaning the house, or it could be meditating or praying or journaling. We may have these signature strategies that we've gone to in the past. Well, how do we make those more conscious as we go through transitions moving forward? Those are examples of how you build your own signature TQ so that those tools are more available for you. Instead of stumbling upon them, you more proactively use them as you need them.
I really like that. It's almost like a reminder of who am I and how have I done this before? When you're feeling all at sea about things, it can be easy to lose sight of those important skills and strengths that we already have. Are there other things like that that are helpful for us to be reminded of as we're in this goo, as you put
Boy,
it?
sometimes we are, the opposite of the glimmers, the things that can hold us back. Some of us might know someone, have a friend or a family member who's been wanting to go through a particular transition and they just can't get there. That maybe they've hated their job and they complain about their job or they complain about their boss over and over and over again, and they just can't seem to move through it. Or maybe they've been in a long-term relationship that isn't that happy and they've been complaining and struggling for a long time, but can't make the move to end the relationship. So I often find that what's behind that inertia are what I call the triple threats. That there's change and transition can be very threatening. To put down a particular identity and to go into this unknown is scary. And so sometimes when we're confronted with that, it's easy to retract and go backwards into what is familiar. And we all know folks who have kind of stayed stuck in that space. And when we're going through a transition, let's say it is initiating a divorce, the idea of being single, that identity change may be really quite overwhelming. That's part of it, our own sense of ourself. The others are how our partners or family are going to react to that change. So maybe our partner does not want a divorce and are going to make this really difficult. Maybe the kids are worried they're going to have to go to therapy. It's just going to wreck everything. So that guilt keeps you from moving forward. And the third of the triple threats is your community. Maybe, you're quite devout to your spiritual religious practice, and your friends are all still married, and you don't know how this is going to impact your community and your friends. Those are real. They're very real circumstances that can impact our courage sometimes, our willingness to step forward through that fire to move through transition. So, again, awareness and support with others who are going through these transitions as well can give you the courage you might need to take those steps.
Yeah, one of the programs that I run is for women navigating change, and it's called Life on Your Terms. And I called it that because I found many clients coming to me saying that they wanted to live more on their terms, and but they had a sense of guilt about that, and it's related to those triple threats. It's ideas about what the people around them and society thought that they should be doing as women, and what they had thought for themselves about what their life should look like. But they were reaching a point where they were wanting to reclaim life for themselves on their terms and not be and kind of reframe and reject some of the ideas about how women should be living. And so that life on your terms has that focus, but it's also, as you say, the opportunity to connect with others who are going through the same sort of experience. So it's very, again, it's that normalizing process. It's a sense of community that we're in this together, and we're learning and discovering and growing together, which I really love facilitating. It's very rewarding work. We've been talking today, Carrie, about this in terms of your work and my work, but how has this sort of time of change and internal transition touched on you in your life?
Yeah, boy. I feel like I'm a poster child for this work. Sometimes they do say you teach best what you need to learn. And so I came into MEA, meeting Chip and working for the company at a time when I was in a life quake myself. Was just early into my 50s. I found turning 50 to be remarkably complex. I'm now 58, but at that turning of the decade, I was really confronting ageism. I didn't even know what that word meant, but I found 50 to be this oppressive, scary decade. And I suddenly needed glasses and my hair was turning gray. And I couldn't quite understand how my mindset about what that age meant didn't rectify with how I felt, which is how many women feel. The number of their age is not matching how they're feeling, or the way society is treating us does not match how we're feeling. So I went through that, but also went through a massive shift at that time in my life. I did uh, end a long-term marriage, and that was tricky. And was starting a business that I was launching, and I had one of my kids had a significant mental health breakdown that forced me to put the business on ice, and the ending of the marriage took its turns, and it was a process. It was a lot of starting over and a lot of emotional turmoil. And I really had to confront how I moved through these transitions and learned a lot about it, and found such comfort in finding a community of other folks around the world that the storytelling became the balm. The storytelling became the healing. Finding others who are going through this at the same time provided me courage. Learning these tools helped me to recognize my own patterns and how to move through it in new ways. So I feel very grateful that I had the opportunity to think this through at a time when I really needed it the most. And then have had now many years to face new transitions and changes and life quakes and so on. But I really do believe that transitions are not meant to go at it alone, even though the story is very much our own. But the best way to move through those times is not to keep to yourself and not to tuck in and hold back, but to lean in instead and to share your story and find others.
Yes, and my own story is similar to yours, Carrie, in terms of relationship ending, uh, challenges with children, ending of one phase of my career and the beginning of another phase. And I certainly valued and have appreciated the community that I've experienced through MEA internationally. It's given me lots of touch points for references for my own work as well as my own personal growth and development. And like you, I often reflect, particularly now a few years down the track, and I can look back and see more clearly what was happening a couple of years ago. So there's always that, that beautiful uh, looking in hindsight.
It sounds like, what I think you discovered is what I have that, we go through these difficult times. And then when we look back on it, we can see kind of the great mystery of how these very challenging transitions actually do move us forward in our life in ways we couldn't possibly imagine. That suddenly we're in an entirely different place 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road than we thought. And if someone laid out the story for you of where you'd end up, you wouldn't believe them if they tried. And I do believe that's one of the great things about midlife is that imagine you're sitting as a woman in midlife in a convertible car of your choice, your favorite color, on a beautiful open road of your choice. Maybe the road is snaking along the ocean, maybe it's winding through a forest, but you have this huge view in front of you. You have this horizon ahead. And the rear view mirror is a very small little mirror that's there. And I do believe that is the way that we move through the second half of life is that we spend less time in the rearview mirror and most of our time on the horizon of looking forward and creating an adventurous new path that maybe we never imagined for ourselves to try something new, to be willing to be an amateur or a beginner at something, to not be so concerned about getting it right or looking good, but just for the joy of being a beginner again. Those are the skills that are going to make a big difference as we age. That a lot of what we've done at MEA is reimagining aging and understanding what is it that leads to a long life. That you may have your lifespan, and your lifespan may have a lot to do with your genetics and your healthy habits, your health span, of course. How healthy are you as you get older? But there's these other subtle factors, these social factors that impact how long we live. And it has to do with, are we in relationships with others? Are we in a community? What is the quality of your friendships in your 50s? Was discovered by the Harvard longitudinal study to be the most important factor of a long life is the quality of your friendships in your 50s. So, wow, that becomes a prescription,
Yeah, wow.
right? It's a
Mm.
prescription to make sure we live a long and healthy life is to go build those friendships, to go build that network, to lean in to be a good friend to others, to find those folks that are kindred spirits and like minded souls and invest in that relationship. And that produces what I've come to love a new term called joy span. Dr. Kari Cardinale is a gerontologist in the US, and she coined this term joy span that we might live a long time and we might be healthy, but are we happy? That we may know the kind of curmudgeony old folks who spend the last 10, 20 years of their life complaining about their arthritis and this or that, and they're difficult to be around. Or by contrast, those folks who just keep going throughout life, adventurous, happy, twinkly eyes, joyful. That is the goal to create as a sort of our North Star of moving forward in life.
And the idea of joy span just fills me with joy, actually, just the phrase and the like kind of the idea of the sparkling future, and you described it as, our having our gaze on the future horizon. In finishing up, Carrie, What's on your horizon? What's coming up for you next as you navigate this late 50s and heading towards 60?
I know, it's crazy. I'll be turning 59 in a few months. And wow, that went quick. So I'm sure I'll be doing a lot of reflection on my 50s next year. And for me, as an empty nester, I'm launching a new course at MEA on empty nesting. I'm really fascinated with how my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, very much grew up very self sufficient, out of the house by 18, never looked back, and fairly simple to create a very independent life. And certainly here in the States, a lot of parents who have kids somewhere in that 18 to 28 are finding that they're not launching as quickly, or they may be coming home more often. And so the empty nesting transition is quite different than what we experience. So that to me is quite interesting to lean into understanding that and providing more insight and compassion for other parents who are redefining what this looks like for the emerging adulthood. So I love that. I've loved having the opportunity to work with MEA. That it's introduced me to so many interesting people from all over the world. So I'm excited to continue to lean in with the company and the projects that we are developing together to just lean into this and I don't know, continue exploring all those glimmers that may be appearing as they go. I live in the woods now, up in the mountains, so I'm really enjoying getting back into nature and hiking and getting back into a rhythm with my own health and wellness and relationship with nature. So I'm loving that.
It sounds, Carrie, like you've been really evolving and creating and continuing to evolve a really beautifully well balanced and flourishing life. I love the term flourishing for a full and good life. I'm particularly interested in the work that you're doing on empty nesting as someone who has a young person who's come home a couple of times and may again in the future. And I have two other young adults who live with me. And I imagine they're going to go through a similar path. And there's that whole renegotiating of relationships and boundaries that I didn't experience with my parents, and I haven't seen a lot in generations before me. So there's some new learning there about having young people at home as we age, and so do they. So I look forward to that work. So my final question, Carrie, is if there's one thing you could change about how society views women over 50, what would it be?
What a great question. I think it would be to look at women over 50 as being one of the greatest sources of resource and wisdom ever. That women to me at 50 and up are really hitting their stride. But I think moving through menopause and whether or not we had children or whether or not we had careers, that intense wisdom comes about. And as our brain continues to evolve, as Arthur Brooks says, into our crystallized intelligence, I think women over 50 have such a grace and compassion and wisdom to give to the world and really are a under-recognized treasure.
I really love that. And Carrie, you are one of those women, and hopefully not under-recognized, because you have a really important role to play with MEA as one of the core partners and people who've really built out the content that you've generated and the community that you've created through MEA, which I really appreciate. So, Carrie, thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with us here today. And if you want to find out more about the world's first midlife wisdom school, you'll be able to find all the details about Carrie and the MEA programs in the show notes for this episode. Carrie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sue. Pleasure to be here.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow in your favourite podcast app. I offer coaching and facilitate small group programs for women just like you, and have a newsletter where I share the details of upcoming events. All the links are available in the show notes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep flourishing.